Yep. Okay. Then without further ado, I would like to welcome the first speaker of the affirmative team to open their team's case.
Yeah, cool. Just with POIs, just raise your hand. I'll probably just call for one, so don't freak out. Artists come into the music industry looking to sign with a label with nothing but passion. They leave having gone through the most exploitative experience of their life, where their morals and their values were entirely diminished by the label that they signed to. I'm going to do three things. And what we fix that is, because we oppose labels, we can't get those harms to them. Right, three things in my speech. Firstly, I'll give you a few points of context and I'll give you two substantive points. How the music labels exploit individual artists and how music labels destroy the music industry themselves. Right, before I do that, I'll tell you the problem we see in today's debate is that music labels are incredibly exploitive and ruin the quality of our music. We're going to win today's debate by proving that the music industry is better off without these record labels. Right, a couple points of context. Firstly, what we see record labels do is they sign on an artist, like after that artist, like send them a demo or found on social media, or the record label like knows your parents or something like that. And then they go and manage everything, right? They produce, they manage, do managing, they market all of the music and stuff like that. What we see is that these music labels are oligopolies. There's only a few of them who are actually able to make it in that industry because they have a lot of money, because these music labels also often own things like movie channels, like movie producers like Sony does, or like Disney. No, thank you. What this means is they're able to buy out other smaller competitors. So we only see a few very large competitors within this industry. What we support as opposed to record labels is the independent production of music by these artists, right? Where they hire a producer separately, they separately hire a manager, or you do things yourselves like the marketing through social media and things like that. Right, so how do record labels exploit individual artists? The context here is that record labels are motivated to exploit these individual artists because they want to grow their business, right? They want to make the most profit to deliver to shareholders. And it's like a competitive market with these few other large industries. And so they want to try to get a leg up by getting the most out of this artist. Right, 5 mechanisms to prove this is exploitative. Firstly, there's a power imbalance because record labels have like more money and they have more knowledge about the industry and they have more experts compared to these artists who are incredibly vulnerable because they come to the city without any money on their back, right? And with little knowledge about the industry, certainly much less than what the record label has, right? Secondly, the artists are incredibly disposable. The music industry is seen as an incredibly lucrative industry, right? There's a lot of people who have made a lot of money through it, so lots of people want to get into that industry. And then secondly, so there's lots of people to compete with, but secondly, artists are incredibly easy to shape, right? Like we saw how Disney did this with Selena Gomez, for example, and painted this really good girl image of her to market her music. Thirdly, artists feel like they cannot leave out of these record labels, especially when it gets exploitative, because they feel like they can't get signed again because that music industry generally takes place in like one city, which is Los Angeles. And they're really elite industries, like the producers are all like who knows who and stuff like that. So if you leave, you look difficult to work with, you can get really easily badmouthed. And so those artists are afraid to leave. Fourthly, there are contracts that are made between them, right? Where you sign on for amount of years or to produce an amount of song. Even if clauses in those contracts exist to protect those artists, we think that because these music labels are able to like make really wordy contracts that artists probably don't understand and also have a lot of lawyers on their side, that artists are pretty threatened by those contracts and we don't think that they really understand anything that they're going to be signing. So what we tell you it's going to look like in our world is that because these artists choose who they're signing on and they're under their control, there's much more control for those artists. They're working with multiple people that they themselves chose to hire. And so all of those mechanisms about exploitation don't exist. What are the outcomes here? Basically, what it looks like is that artists get a very little percentage of the money that they get, right? Because of those contracts. They don't get to own their music. This looks like Taylor Swift doesn't own her original music from Scooter Braun, and she's still fighting to get that back and not able to make money from streams from that. It looks like these record labels work these artists to their breaking point, right? They force them to be this certain image that they think will succeed best in this world, or they force you to push past like your mental health issues to continue making songs that you told us you would make in the contract, right? They don't let you have any decisions over your career because they said, I'm the manager, this is what I'm going to do. This looks like Miley Cyrus, who went through like a psychotic break because she was so controlled by those people who were managing her and managing her music that she had to go and completely paint a new name for herself and went through awful struggles with mental health that really pushed her to the edge. Basically, this material here wins us the debate because if we're causing harm to these people who are most essential to the music industry, which is those artists, that's really bad for the industry. Secondly, I'm going to talk about how these record labels destroy the music industry. Before I'll do that, I'll take a POI if one's available.
You talked earlier about an oligopoly forming. Do you consider that this like consolidation into an oligopoly also happens on your side of the house, except it is with rich people with the funding to produce their music instead of record labels?
No, because we think it's much easier to be able to just go and hire a producer and things like that. We think the cost will get much cheaper if that's like not something that artists can afford. That's not going to happen on our side. Right. How this destroys the music industry. The context here is what I told you about how there's like an oligopoly, which Nate just brought up with their POI. Cool. So I've got 4 mechanisms here. Firstly, these record labels promote only the production of mainstream music. Because these record labels only want to do things that worked in the past because it guarantees an outcome of success for them, which means that they can get the most money through that individual artist and be most effective. It means they don't let artists do their own music that actually reflects them and actually reflects their values. It means these artists have to do simply what is decided is the best thing to do by those record labels. On our side, artists actually can branch out because they're not controlled by this record label. They can go and make unique music and actually go and take risks that we tell you those labels aren't willing to do. No, thank you. Secondly, these labels don't have to make quality music, right? Because there's very few record labels in this industry. The names are enough to get these songs on the radio. It doesn't actually have to be a good song for it to be played on the radio. What this means is that we get songs like I Feel Funny by Justin Bieber, where they're actually terrible quality songs, but they still get played on the radio, and Justin Bieber and the record label are still rewarded for making such a bad song. Thirdly, the only music put out there is like the same music, right? This is the same, it's the only music put out there is from those record labels. This is the same mechanism I gave you on those labels, but I also tell you under there that because their name gets them on the radio, you don't hear unique music, and so we're not going to hear different types of music getting out there. Fourthly, less artists get the spotlight because out of these few really large record labels, they have a few big singers who they focus the most money on because it's the most guaranteed to get them returned because they're already big artists. So what this means is that only a few artists actually get a lot of money pushed towards them in marketing and actually get a lot of money into making them good songs because it's the only ones that record labels feel like they can get a return from. The outcome here is that the market of music isn't actually what listeners want. It's what is the few companies want to produce, right? It's the same repetitive songs. It's the same things that don't branch out. This means that we can't have people discovering unique music that really connects with them. It means we don't get people who can listen to music that actually understands them and they feel like actually comprehends them. We think that's really degrading to the entire quality of the music industry. And so we also think that's a really big outcome of today's debate.
All right, we'd like to thank the first speaker for their speech and now open up the first speaker of the negating team.
Record labels provide a clear path through the treacherous jungle of the music industry. They're an opt-in model and people choose to opt in because they work. Before we get into the main substantive of how this is better for artists, I would like to establish a few framing points and why they've really mischaracterized what this industry would look like in our world and their world. So, first of all, records are not a monolith. They vary from the big studios that have signed billion-dollar contracts that generally do, we admit, have a monopoly over things like Drake and other major artists, but there are many, many other smaller types of record studios that are really good for smaller artists, such as indie labels, genre-specific labels like rock labels, local labels like the local Christchurch label or the local Wellington label that focuses on Wellington or Christchurch artists. Record labels with a specific emphasis on elevating person of color artists. And all these niches in the market are all inhabited by different record labels that find different areas of profitability. These exist and people use them because they provide a unique benefit to the artists of all sizes, utility that simply doesn't exist on their side of the house. Their side, people can only get big by either being rich and famous, using their wealth to bulldoze to the top, because if you're just a small music artist, you're not going to be hiring all these producers and streamers and stuff before you get big. Or you get your money through internet virality, like with Justin Bieber, which is A, super duper rare, B, at the random hest of the algorithm, so it doesn't really check for quality like a record label scout would. Without labels, these people then don't have help to capitalize on their fame too, if you get famous through internet virality, and they often become one-hit wonders in their world. On our side, we've got talent scouts, record labels constantly looking for new artists to capitalize on. We've got rock genre specific labels, no thank you, that take in rock artists and local city artists that can look for regional talent to make regional money. Before I get into my main substantive and how this is better for artists, I would like to rebut a few of the claims made by the other side. First off, they've went and said that artists can't leave and they feel trapped and stressed that they have to keep up a constant workload. First of all, I'd like to point out this is something that's inherently true to every job that has ever existed. And two, I would like to point out that this is symmetrical on both sides of the house, because if you're famous through something like internet virality, or you've got an audience, they're going to want you to keep producing songs, and you're still going to feel this pressure so that you don't fade into irrelevance and obscurity. Furthermore, they've come out with this really elitist point about the quality of music and how we need artist's voice because mainstream stuff is inherently bad. We've got 4 lines of response. 1, indie specific labels exist to elevate and share them with audiences that actually care about that kind of stuff. 2, mainstream appeal is not inherently bad. People actually like this stuff. That's why it's mainstream. We reject the elitism here. People love and are able to be fulfilled by mainstream artists like Harry Styles, etc. And it's very unfair for them to say that this music is inherently bad. They're not art critics. They can't decide what's good or bad. It's all subjective. 3, they've made a point about freedom. But once you're big through record labels, as we're established now, you've got a way more freedom to experiment with your work because you're not scared of losing everything because you've got more wealth. And finally, 4, it's optional. If you're really, really upset about music labels affecting your voice, you can just not opt in. So now that we've gotten that out of the way, let's establish why this is actually better for the artist signed. We're going to give you 3 reasons for this here today. Number 1 is monetization. In their world, it's really, really hard to make money. Artists lack the in-depth knowledge and resources to build out the massive systems of monetization that exist inherently to record labels. Record labels produce multiple avenues of profitability for artists, which is important because when we've got things like Spotify streaming making money, unless you're getting millions and millions of views, you're only getting cents for the thousands of viewers you're getting, and you're not actually making enough money to live on. And so with these monetization options presented by record labels, artists can live, they can afford to not take on a second job and spend more time on their work. And in general, they've got better options for their long-term music career. So what are these benefits for monetization? 1, record labels have signing bonuses and provide stable paychecks, allowing artists not to fear their financial situation. 2, record labels have networks of tour bookings that, and even with smaller things like indie record labels, they can get you gig jobs in a pub or a small local thing. Bigger record labels can organize international concerts, which it simply isn't feasible to get one artist to both make the music and then organize every single surrounding point around the music making and distributing process. This is a ridiculous claim put by this board, and we take a lot of the burden work off for artists by getting these record labels to do it. 2, record labels have unique benefits because they know the stadium owners, they understand things like, and they know these people, and they can organize things like flights, time, etc. because they've done these things before. Finally, they've got big benefits in terms of merchandising, as record labels can find designers and know companies already that can produce high quality merch and know the optimal pricing to put that merch at. Because of that, all these alternative revenue streams like merch, etc., can come to music artists that simply they wouldn't get under their system. This allows artists to live off their work, spend more time honing their craft and creating higher quality art, which counteracts all their points about lower quality art. 2, connections. Record labels can hook you up with other artists who can feature in your work, making both of you better off. They get publicity by being in your work, you get publicity by having them in your work. Your audiences intermingle, and if you like each other's stuff, you both get bigger. Furthermore, by connecting high quality artists, there's better quality art because they can share their individual systems and art tricks with each other, making better music. 2, record labels provide connections through things like setting people up with sound equipment, studios to record their music in, quality instruments, producers to mix their music. And while all these things just don't exist on their side of house, and where they do, they have to all hire them out of their own pocket, these individual artists. And 2, they're going to be lower quality because they don't actually know the industry well enough to pick the optimal people for their specific genres of music. Finally, that outreach, right? We think record labels, for the reasons they've talked about, with it being more competitive and out-competing the non-record artists, we can get more viewers on our side of the house for our artists. These record labels have connections to advertising networks. They can get you in ads on the internet. They can organize things like publicity stunts and billboards with their many networks and resources. They can put your music on more platforms. For example, a small record label with connections to the local radio can put your music on Christchurch radio. And you can organize interviews with press, know how to sell your own brand of music, and in general know how to sell your specific brand of music, and in general help you reach a larger audience. I'll take it, is it 8 minutes? Okay. And so for these reasons we've established, 1, there's more monetization on our side of the house, as these records people can live off their work, right? We've also demonstrated that more viewers will see their work and enjoy their music. 2, there'll be connections and high quality work through that. They won't have to organize the whole team, which is just a ridiculous idea. And in general, we've just got this way stronger system for all people involved. We can't stand for a world where every artist has to organize their own thing in every single minute way. It's incredibly beneficial on our side to have this kind of benefit. And so we should win this debate because of this. Thank you.
All right, we'd like to thank that speaker for their speech, and we now invite up the second affirmative speaker to continue their team's case.
Oh, I'll be just 1 second. Sorry. Oh, I have my introduction. Can you pass me that? Thank you. Okay. Record labels bleed artists dry, sapping them of their creative potential and making them into completely different people than they were previously. All that TNEG has done thus far in this debate is paint an unreasonably charitable picture of record labels. We're not going to stand for that fantasy world. 3 points in this speech. Number one, why will artists still be exploited? Oh, no, why artists are exploited, sorry. Number two, why artists can still achieve success without the backing of a massive record label. And then finally, why we get generally a better music industry, right? Number one, then, on why artists will be exploited. So the majority of the mechanisms that we gave you at Cara went unresponded to about these specific ways in which, was that a POI? No. In which artists are able to be exploited by their record labels. We told you this looks like things like the fact that they are manipulated into joining that record label because they just believe that it's entirely necessary for success because they see all those massive artists are signed to, like, you know, Sony Music or something like that. And then we also told you that it's incredibly hard for them to then leave these record labels because of the fact that these contracts are, like, incredibly litigious, right? Super wordy, and that also those record labels have the backing of super expensive lawyers who are able to keep those artists within those contracts or just like sap a bunch of money out of them because record labels care fundamentally about money, right? So what do we hear in response? Firstly, we heard basically like that record labels are not all bad. They're not all these like massive, oligopolic, what's the word? They're not all oligopolies. I don't know how to phrase that as an adjective. They're not all oligopolies, right? We tell you this may be true. There do exist some niche record labels which deal with specific genres or specific groups of people, but we tell you that's not the majority of them. We tell you the reason that those are smaller labels is just by virtue of the fact that they sign less artists. So we tell you that those record labels just do not matter as much in this debate because we tell you that the majority of artists are signed to these really, really massive labels like Sony Music, right? But even so, we tell you in those instances, this exploitation is actually likely to be worse because if you are signed to, if you were like signed to the only record label in your area, like which deals with specific artists in your area or like artists which work in your genre, then we tell you that it's even harder for you to find an alternative because you can't just go to another record label, right? So we tell you that like, if that characterization is the case, then all of our harms around exploitation actually stand to a greater degree, and those niche artists or like already marginalized artists are going to be exploited to an even greater degree. The next thing that they tell us then, a few responses, they tell us that like exploitation happens in any job, no thanks. That doesn't have to be the case though, like why shouldn't we be striving for a better world? We don't think that's a good enough response. Then they also tell us like there's a symmetrical exception acting on these artists, right? There's an expectation that they produce a whole lot of music because of their audience. We tell you a couple things. Number one is that their audience like doesn't have the same financial incentive that these massive record labels do. They don't personally financially benefit from these artists putting out money. They probably like care about that artist personally to an extent because like nowadays artists like have a very, very public image. Like, Harry Styles fans have a super personal connection to Harry Styles. So if Harry Styles like in our world puts out an Instagram post and says, guys, I'm not going to release music for the next year or so, his artists might be a bit sad, but they're probably going to understand that. On the comparative, record labels have this massive expectation that artists put out as much music as possible because that's literally how they make money. So they just push them to make really, really like a whole lot of music, right? And we tell you that they're able to do that through like the threat of firing, all of those mechanisms that we gave you that have gone unresponded to. And so we tell you that these record labels just like don't have the same personal connection to artists that their audience do. So this is not like symmetrical in any means. The next thing that they tell us is that record labels are like an opt-in situation. Note that they did not engage with the mechanisms that we told you, right? Because we told you at Cara that people feel that it's necessary for their success because of the fact that these record labels have so much money. They know that in order for them to catch up to all those other artists who are signed to record labels in success, they probably have to sign to a record label. We also told you that a lot of these people just like don't have the resources to know that a contract is bad or exploitative and they can't get out of them. So it's not an opt-in, opt-out situation. They're basically forced to stay within these record labels, right? So that's why all of our stuff around exploitation stands. What we see generally on the comparative is just like artists literally aren't exploited because they just make the music that they want when they want. If it's successful, then they receive success. The music industry becomes a meritocracy, right? Secondly, then on, that's really important in this debate because artists are like the key stakeholder in this debate. Like they are the ones who run the music industry. We should care the most about them. Obviously, we should especially care about those who have less money and therefore are more susceptible to being exploited by these record labels. So that's why this is like debate winning for us. But secondly, then, can artists achieve success, right? So basically, this was like the core of Neg's case. They told us that record labels are the only way, or they just make it a whole lot easier for artists to achieve success in the music industry and then get like, monetize their career. We tell you, sorry, I apologize. We tell you a few things, right? We tell you number one, we gave you like these mechanisms around how nowadays basically every popular artist receives that initial success from social media. They tell us a few responses. Number one, they tell us that virality is super rare. That's absolutely not true. If you look at like the Hot 100 right now, it's majority like, TikTok songs and stuff like that, right? So we tell you that artists do have the possibility to get into the public eye. I'll take it off this point. To get into the public eye through social media. They also tell us like these algorithms are random. These algorithms are not random. They're based off of like other people's other interests. They're like specifically designed to keep you on that app. So they like have an incentive to make sure that whatever you're seeing is something that you'll like. So generally they're probably going to pair people up with like music that they're likely to like. The next thing they tell us then is that they won't be able to monetize their career, right? We tell you that this is absolutely not true because they tell us like, for instance, through Spotify streams, artists do not make a whole lot of money because Spotify takes a whole chunk of that money. We tell you on the comparative, what we see is not just Spotify, but like the record label itself taking a massive proportion of that money. And on our side of the house, you're probably still putting music on the same platform. So you're probably, but it's just like without the cut being taken out by your record label. So we tell you like, you're probably going to get more of your money on our side of the house. They also tell us, that like record labels can give you like connections for collabs and stuff like that to improve your success. Okay, sorry, I'm not gonna take it. To give you like connections that you can like, work off of each other's success and stuff like that. We tell you that's absolutely symmetrical. Artists still have an incentive to collab so that they can, co-opt each other's audiences and stuff like that. But we tell you it's better on our side of the house because the producers are like artists or whoever those artists are being collaborating like with. We tell you that they're going to be people who they actually want to work with. What we see on the comparative is that record labels pair artists up with each other who like are signed to that record label. They pair producers and artists up. Those are entirely artificial connections. They don't actually make like good music or like the best music that they can possibly make. So that's why we generally get a better music industry. A few other reasons is that like basically all the mechanisms that we gave you about why we get a better music industry stand, the only response that they gave us was like, mainstream music is not bad. We agree with that completely, but we think that mainstream music should not be the only thing. The reality is record labels like manipulate their artists into making only mainstream music because they want them to get as much success as possible. Mainstream music is how you get as much money as possible. So we like want more variety. We agree mainstream music is not bad, but we just want less of it. Thank you.
All right, we'd like to thank that speaker for their speech and now invite up the second negating speaker to reply.
The lack of comparative work from Side F in this debate is appalling. After 16 minutes, I still don't know how these small indie artists from these minority backgrounds are going to be successful in their world. We heard like absolutely nothing as to what the alternative system is to these record labels. I'm going to do three things. Firstly, I'm going to talk about the capabilities to succeed, specifically within the context of minorities. Secondly, what this means for mental health. And then thirdly, the industry at large. Firstly, on the comparative. Side F does very little here to actually paint a picture of what their world looks like. They basically say that success comes from social media, and those that have good social media presence are those that are going to be successful. What we're going to say here is that only people with capital are going to be able to succeed in the music industry in their world, because we tell you similarly to how these record labels give you this capital, allowing these people to succeed. We tell that people that have this capital, the amount to spend, will be the ones to succeed. We look to the fact that they can put money towards advertising, creating massive social media preference, and we can say that the mechanism that they provide you of like being successful through social media is something that is easily gained simply by being rich, buying heaps of followers, like buying like promotions with people just to like launch your platform. It also looks like buying features on like other artists' music records and labels and stuff, and getting your name out there that way. Or it just looks like you buying listens on Spotify, so you can like boost artificially your place on the Spotify algorithm, so you appear more on the front page, more on like your like discover weekly for people, and more people engage with you. Or it just simply looks like you being able to buy more things such as tours and like put out merch just to generally increase your presence. So I think at the end of this, they need to realize that their model in their world, their world is uniquely like the only people that can succeed in their world are people that have capital available and are capable of getting all of this money to do this initial funding. What we say here is that as a consequence of this, it's very hard for them to actually empower these like people who just come from these more niche backgrounds, come from these minority backgrounds. How do we empower these people on our side of the house? We tell you two ways. Firstly, just the existence of niche labels. Ethan did all this work talking about like these niche Christchurch label, maybe a niche like rap label, or niche indigenous music label, and these can like provide the initial funding, probably not the same as like this massive like rap label, but enough to like simply get these people off the ground so they can produce enough music while not going like cash negative. It also looks like the existence of scouts within the music industry, seeking people out and like finding individuals that have good talent and signing them on labels, as opposed to people having to artificially create their success through money. What this looks like is people like Eminem like being brought up and like being found due to his success and being scouted. So I think at the end of this, why do we tell you that record labels are generally like preferable to the rich consolidating? A couple reasons. Firstly, we just simply get more minorities being able to like share their music. We get more niche music forms. We get like more things such as rap, like making it into the sphere. And we tell this is important for two reasons. Firstly, it just allows people to engage with music which is of cultural significance to them. Something like rap in America is of immense cultural significance to African Americans. At the point in time that it becomes more mainstream and more like accessible and more music's created due to these labels existing, we simply just get like more people like actually engaging with this cultural significance. It also uplifts these communities. At the point in time there's a successful artist from these communities, they can help get that, they can promote it and like just better everyone within these communities. Secondly, we tell you we generally get broader, better music as we just simply have like more music available across like more different types. Thirdly and finally, we just get more diverse music. So I think we've actually painted a picture of what their world looks like. It's an oligopoly, but it's a lot worse than our oligopoly. Next, let's talk about the specific harms to the artists. Here, I want to try and flip the power imbalance that they gave to and explain why the power balance actually lies in the hand of the artist as opposed to the hands of the label within these cases. Five kind of reasons. Firstly, I just thought it was extremely uncharitable for them to say that there's like no like legal mechanisms or like contracts in place to prevent like massive power imbalances happening. We think there's been increased scrutiny within like the music industry. Look to like the Me Too movement, like basically exposing the whole of Hollywood. We believe that these music like labels and like generally entertainment as a whole is facing increased scrutiny and is more susceptible to like being cancelled for like engaging in these fraudulent contracts. Therefore, we believe there's general trends towards like these contracts not being ludicrous and extremely one-sided. Secondly, we tell the power imbalance lies on the side of the artist because the artist is the one actually providing the music and therefore providing the money towards the success of the label. What this looks like is the artist having the capability to threaten to leave the label if the label is abusive towards them, being able to like put them in a position where they have to kind of like meet their like demands. But also, and further to this, if they like damage the mental health of the artist by like working them to the ground, they're not actually going to be getting any benefit out of this massive contract that they've signed for this individual because they've been so worked into the ground and they're just so unmotivated and they just continue to produce bad music. I think we don't run people into the ground on our side of the house. Thirdly and finally, we just generally say it like damages the reputation of the label if it's found out that it's churning these people out, and it puts them in a position where they do not want to do that because if they damage their reputation, other people's are not going to be wanting to sign with other new artists, not going to be wanting to sign with them due to their reputation hurting further profit. Fourthly, we tell that fans have also some leverage here. The fans can leverage and like boycott these music platforms as their favorite artist is like in this really terrible position with like this label and this label's abusing them. These fans can provide like a broad like boycott against these artists, and we say something this is uniquely enabled by like the growth of social media. Fifthly and finally, we just simply tell you that these individuals have the capability to resign and opt out at any point in time. What this looks like is them being able to create their own label label due to their success under this label, or just using like their own independent platform to continue like creating success because they have been propelled to the certain point by this label, created a bit of a brand, and they can use that into the future. So I think at the end of these 5 reasons, we say very little power and balance exists, and if anything, it lies in the hands of the fans and the artists. Just specifically to do with the context of niche labels, they said more of a power imbalance exists within niche labels due to them only being one label within this. We tell you that most of these mechanisms still stand, and how these like niche labels are also like reliant on these like niche artists to produce the music. And we say that they like create like a platform they can also step away. Right. Next, I just want to like paint a picture of the mental health harms that are unique to their side of the house when these artists are not able to engage with things such as labels. Because I know there's some unique benefits that you actually get from having labels. There's 3 things. Firstly, these people are probably demoralized in their world because they never succeed in music because they simply just do not have access to the labels. They just say they're like a poor person, they can't afford to like get their feet off the ground. They can never succeed and they're constantly demoralized, and it constantly drains them down. Secondly, we tell that record labels have the unique benefits of like staff and managers able to like remove the burden of having to organize your tours and stuff like that, organize your concert, organize like when you're releasing music, organize maybe your, like who your producer is. That takes a lot of burden off you as an individual, and you can instead focus on producing your music. It also looks like these record labels probably having like mental health stuff, such as like psychiatrists and like, I don't know, like, those kind of people around, and therapists to kind of help them through any problems they have so they can continue producing good quality music. We know these are generally exclusive to labels because if you're independent, you simply just do not have like access to this broad network. Thirdly, and finally, we tell you that like in terms of like what the comparative is for like the average niche artist in their world is generally living paycheck to paycheck. That's a lot worse for mental health than actually having some sizable contract existing. Finally, let's deal with what this means for the industry as a whole. They kind of painted a picture of how this destroys the music industry, but I think I'll just note to the fact that we've basically lived under music labels for like a very long time, and I don't think the music label industry has been destroyed. So I think that's enough of a baseline response to say that we're not going to see a collapse of like the music industry. But I'm just going to give 4 further reasons as to why we don't like see like a collapse and like a strong pull towards mainstream under labels. Firstly, there's incentives case towards niches. There's unique markets. You get capital from like having like this unique label. We tell that gives like a unique incentive to cater towards these more niche artists. Secondly, there's generally like minority rap producers which like create platforms for other rap producers to like produce under them, like further like creating the platform and pulling away from the mainstream. Thirdly, we just say in their world that it becomes increasingly like mainstream because the only successful music artists are going to be people like Charli D'Amelio and Addison Rae who just use their massive capital to like buy their platform, create like one shitty song, and then that's it, and they just create like this overly mainstream pop song. I think at the end of this, we actually need to hear at their third AF speech how they're going to paint this world to be like, because I think they've done absolutely nothing and we've taken the liberty of doing so and making it look terrible. So proud to negate.
All right, we'd like to thank the speaker for their speech and now invite up the third affirmative speaker to speak.
Awesome. So I will just take Peel Ride's raising hand.
The issue with record labels like Sony Music is that they have total control of their artists. They dictate what they wear, what they do, and how they act and what they say. This looks like an artist like Sam Smith having to hide the fact that he was gay from the public for years, even though he wanted to share it with the public because his record label told him to do it. And that is because record labels have strict contracts that dictate what these artists can do and don't give them any control. It is time we move away from this. 3 things I'm going to do in today's speech. Firstly, I'm going to talk about how artists still have success on our side. Secondly, I'm going to talk about why it will be exploitative why record labels are just intrinsically exploitative. And then thirdly, I'm going to talk about how record labels destroy the quality of the music industry. So first, let's talk about why artists still have success. Look, at Second New, they made this big push that on our side, artists don't succeed. So what I'm going to do is talk to you about why they actually do succeed on our side. Look, we told you from the start at Curra that artists can succeed through the internet and social media like TikTok and like Instagram or like SoundCloud in the first place. We said that it's a growing industry, that years ago we did need record labels, but now we don't because these industries have become more popular. What did we hear to this? Firstly, they told us that it's rare for these artists to become popular on a platform like TikTok or social media. And secondly, that they just become one-hit wonders. 2 responses to this. Firstly, what I'd say to this is that these artists actually on TikTok, it is not unrare for them to become popular. And that's because people are constantly producing and is constantly getting out there. That is why millions of artists get suddenly heard. And that's why we have artists like Benny suddenly become popular, because we have all this release of music and people become exposed to it through the algorithm and through that. But secondly, we'd say that their names do become recognizable and they're not one-hit wonders, because once you have a piece of art out there that people appreciate, for example, through social media, and they like the vibe of, they will continue to want to listen to your works. And that's when we get people listening to more indie music. That's when we get people listening to people like Benny, who became a one-hit wonder in New Zealand, not a one-hit wonder, who became popular in New Zealand. And that is why we changed. What else did they tell us then? They told us that these people can't succeed on our side because they can't get the cool equipment and they can't access all that. Look, the reality of the situation is that most music artists in the industry can already get access to equipment and can produce music. The issue is about getting it out there and getting people to listen to it. Look, I've already addressed that in my point by talking about how people actually hear about it through the internet and through social media. Look, but we recognize that these artists can use equipment because, for example, they just purchase it on their own because they care about art and music. So they purchase their own recording stuff at home. But even then, if they can't afford that, we'd say that they just go to community centres that have them produce there, and then they post this stuff on SoundCloud. That is why we have smaller, poorer artists all the time becoming popular on social media, because it is easier to produce the music and get access to sound equipment if they're really passionate about it. The issue is about getting it out to the public. And the issue with record labels is that they only let a select few people get out to the public, whereas when we have a heavier influence on social media, we get smaller artists out to the public. What did they then say to this? They told us that richer people will only benefit on our side and only rich people can dictate the music industry. Look, 3 responses to this. Firstly, I've already addressed this by saying that, look, smaller artists can get their production out because, they own their own producing equipment because they care about producing music, and they can find local producers. And we think on our side, the producer relationship with the artist is actually really superficial. And so we get good quality art that becomes successful and is produced on that front. But we secondly told you that now it's actually about the actual quality than rather popularity. And so we get it produced there. But thirdly, even if you don't believe all this context, what we tell you is that rich people already have the leg up on both sides of the house, particularly on their side where parents own something like the record label, or the influential businesses who have stakeholders in this record label are of the rich people, and they just buy their way in anyway. So we think they have an advantage on their side, but under the status quo anyway. Then what have we told us then? So understanding that, what we've shown is that we are able to get success on our side because they get success through social media, and they are able to access stuff like producing and equipment. What else did they tell us here quickly? They told us on their side that they get more monetary success. 2 responses to this. Firstly, they don't get as much monetary success as they claimed because record labels take massive chunks of your share. And that's simply because, like they said, record labels do a lot. And so they just take that money out of you, so you're not actually getting a financial stable income. But secondly, we'd say that the individuals like just lack the knowledge of the music industry, and that's why they go to record labels, because, and this is to be clear, not in terms of equipment, but they lack knowledge in terms of their pay that they should be getting, which means that labels can give them less than what they're worth for. And this is regardless of an oligopoly, like Larry told you. What this means is that they aren't actually getting as much monetary benefit as they say. Look, their final push under this point was that these people would get connections and like such as booking, merch, and sound equipment. Like once again, these people will have access to their sound equipment anyway, because if you're passionate about producing music, sound equipment is fairly cheap and you can get it from community centres too. But otherwise, once you become big off the social media, then you are able to use the money that you gain from social media, which tends to be quite a lot because you gain a lot of popularity, to go outsource and find people to book stadiums for you, to go book that, which you can do yourself. At the end of this, we have shown you that our artists will get success on our side from becoming popular through TikTok and social media. But even if they don't become as successful as Side, what we'd say is that comes at the cost of exploitation, which is on to my second point on why they will be more exploitative on their side. Look, we told you from Kara down the line that we get more exploitation on their side from power imbalances, from artists being disposable, from artists not having the information that these record labels have, and that these artists have limited ability to leave. All of these mechanisms mean that these artists don't lack the information, and that these music industries can easily exploit them by doing things like taking a greater share of the sum of the money, or doing things like forcing them to change their identity for the label. What did we hear in response to this at Second? Look, they told us that legal regulations would stop this. Look, what happens is these big industries like Sony Music just have like powerful lawyers work in their favor that prevent like them from getting found out for like the way that they treat the workers. But also we'd secondary say in that like intrinsically they just can find grounds to fight that they have rights to take away this money from these artists in the first place. Secondly, they told that the artists actually had the power advantage. Look, two responses to this. First, this is just intrinsically not true, because the artists just don't have the knowledge about the music industry and their pay to have this power, and that the music industry has all the connections like they told us in their first point, so that just completely contradicts their case. And secondly, we told you that it's really competitive in the music industry, and so artists are like, they can just like dispose of these artists. Finally, they said that they could just damage the reputation of the music industry if they are found out to be exploited. But this relies on these artists having fans in the first place. What we are talking about is when these artists first sign up to this industry, they have to get their pay taken away from them. They have long hours. They can't go to another firm. And we told you from the start and down the line, they can't just leave and go to another label, because then they look difficult. They are labeled as difficult, not wanting to work with these people who have the whole control of this industry. At the end of this, these people are going to be exploited. They're going to have their rights taken away. They're not going to get paid the amount that they deserve, and ultimately their identity is just going to be stripped from them. We can't stand for this in this debate.
Right, we'd like to thank that speaker for their speech, and now invite up the third negating speaker to close out the substantive portion of this debate.
Yeah, just for POIs, like a visual indicator. Okay. Two parts of the speech today. Firstly, I'll be explaining the first point of clash, effects on artists, and then secondly, the second point of clash, effects on the music industry. Okay, now I have a lot to cover, so I'll skip an intro, but I'll move on to artists. I think we bring you 7 mechanisms on why artists are better off on our side of the house. We've shown you the comparative where on their side of the house, where it's dominated by these big names or those with financial backing who are able to dominate like the news waves, are able to produce these advertisements. No response to this at all. And then secondly, the way that The alternative they stand for is stuff like SoundCloud, where people who are SoundCloud rappers are seen as a joke by not only the public as a whole, but those in the music industry. They'll be ostracized and they'll be unable to break through when they're on SoundCloud because it's a joke platform. And Spotify, which is oversaturated with little known artists, is barely monetized. You make like 0.1 cent for like 1,000 views on Spotify. You cannot make money off this platform. And then it's dominated by big artists. When you're on Spotify, you're going to be competing against like Harry Styles or whatever. You aren't going to be able to break through. And then Spotify is also a platform that's easily abused and lets the rich get ahead, which once again just separates between the rich artists with the financial backing on their house. And then so the only way to break through on their house, therefore, is either to be rich or have like the 0.1% chance of winning like Britain's Got Talent or X Factor, or like going viral and managing to have sustained success. I think we went off this alone based on the fact that their own model only allows like a very small chance. You're either rich or you're really lucky. That's the only way you can succeed. We went on this alone because we allow more artists to succeed. Anything else is margin widening material. Okay, and then we sort of explained four other reasons. We told you that we get better monetization, better connections, better outreach, which is particularly good for smaller artists, since these music labels are able to compensate for their lesser financial capabilities. We also gave you the ideas about scouting and like niche labels who allow like exclusive areas, like for example, Kendrick Lamar. He's an artist who's a prime example of someone who got picked up by a niche label and now is one of the biggest rappers in the world. We got no response to this, especially our material on minorities, which is very important insofar as that they're like a community who are exclusively uplifted by our side of the house. In terms of responses, we get like that people can go viral. Once again, this is really rare. And even if you are going viral, without the financial backing and like the knowledge of the music industry, they themselves said that artists have no knowledge. And like some kid on TikTok isn't going to have more knowledge than like an artist who they said has no knowledge. Without this knowledge, you aren't going to be breakthrough and have sustained success. And then they talked about the record label like taking money. We tell you that when you're on Spotify making 0.1 cent per like 1,000 views, you're not going to be making any money anyway. It's far better to like have the record label taking some money, but making substantially more money through like a massive signing bonus or yeah. And we tell you that also with the record label, you're making more money in the first place since you get access to like these better equipment or anything. The only response we got to equipment was that you can go to a community college and use a community college microphone. There's a major difference between like $1 million studios microphone and the microphone at like Orange County Community College. That's like a completely irrelevant response. And then we got this stuff about collaborations being symmetric. Collaborations aren't symmetric since you don't have the connections of this record label, especially when you're a smaller artist who often only break through collaborations. You don't have the connection to make this happen. Okay, now onto the material they've given. They sort of told you that this like power imbalance is terrible. 4 reasons why the power imbalance is in favor of the artist. First of all, artists have lawyers to review contracts. When you're a rich artist, you're going to have a good lawyer who can review this contract. Secondly, fans will like cancel a record label if they're like really oppressive. Artists actually make the money for the record label. The record label isn't going to like tell Harry Styles that he has to work 45 hours a week or like all this like terrible work week or whatever. And fourthly, boycotts. Like when these artists see like a terrible record label engaging in all these bad practices, they aren't going to go there. That means that artists have the power to restrict these terrible practices. Even if, for the sake of the argument, we hypothetically take them at their best, the power imbalance is like a natural like employer-employee thing. This exists in every workplace. The employer is always like the one who has more power in the relationship. Then they talk about disposable artists. When your music has gotten bad, you're going to be disposed on both sides of the house. That is because that is how the free market system works. Then they brought us this stuff about like you can't leave because you get slandered. You will not get slandered because other music labels will be bending over backwards trying to sign you to them because you make lots of money if you're a successful artist. And then they talked about like contracts and manipulations. We tell you that like Harry Styles will have like this great lawyer who will review the contract thoroughly. And then overworking. Tom responded to this excellently. We tell you that the music quality will be decreased. So these labels aren't going to overwork you. Yeah, so even if we accept this, at that case at their world, we see the same exploitation because I like to bring you back to like their model. The comparative they're standing for is like we have these agents and producers, individual. If we like accept all their characterization at their best case, I tell you that these agents will now have more power since they have like taken place of these record labels. They now have the sole power of the artists. And further to this, we'll see power agents formed because they will now have like all, because like everyone will be flocking to like a particular agent instead of a particular studio. And even in this case, we still come out on top because our comparative is better. Two reasons why. First of all, these like agents won't have the same capital for equipment. And secondly, these agents won't have the same connections. This means that even at like both teams' worst case, we still come out on top since like a monopoly of studios is better. So yeah, I think we come out on top based on artists, based on the fact we have artists, better music, no engagement there. And I think we've successfully cancelled out their like sole point around artists, which was like this power imbalance. Our stuff on the music industry just further widens the margin for victory. Okay, we bring you three sort of mechanisms for music artists: targeted labels, better outreach, particularly minorities, for example, like the ASAP label. And then thirdly, like better music quality. We get the AF response that this rich people have a leg up in like both worlds. We tell you in their world, rich people have 2 legs up because on side AF, these rich people are the only ones who have like the capital to like buy good funding equipment, buy like connections and like buy views on Spotify or whatever. And then once again, we get this community college mic response. I've already dealt with that. And then just in terms of this substance they provide, they say that you're going to be like buying out competitors. We tell you that a similar drowning out effect is symmetrical on their side of the house, except it's rich people drowning out these other music artists instead of like these big labels. We've already explained why big labels are preferable to these big artists in both houses. And then they bring us the stuff about the oligopoly. They say it only promotes certain music. 2 responses here. First of all, about indie music. People who engage with indie music are going to be engaging with it anyway, since it's what they like. And then secondly, the stuff about drowning out creative voice. Studios and labels care about money. When they see a successful formula, they won't change that successful formula. This like creative voice is maintained on our side of the house. And then secondly, the stuff about quality music. We just tell you auto like censoring mechanisms will be in place, like dislikes and like no views and no engagements and whatever. And they said the same music every time on the radio. Music that's on every time in the radio is on for a reason, because it's popular and because it's good music. And then the less artist stuff, we've already brought the stuff about niche labels who bring specific artists in. So I think overall we care about music and they don't. They responded to none of our material and we win the debate based off that. Thank you.
All right, great. We'd like to thank the speaker for their speech, and we will now, as is tradition, reverse the speaking order. And so I'd like to welcome up the leader of the negating team to give their reply.
Even if you buy-side AFs attempted to wash this debate and say that rich people are going to game the system and succeed in either world, we tell you uniquely, even in our worst case, we enable people from a broader background to get success from the contracts and scouting that you get from things such as these record labels existing. That is why we're incredibly proud to affirm in this debate. Right, I'm going to chat about 3 things. Firstly, on success. Secondly, on the artists, like what it means for the artists. And then just firstly, I just want to note on the community material. I think we brought you good community material and how we get like greater outreach, like the minority communities from creating music that is empowering and uplifting to them, and it becomes more mainstream and they can engage with it a lot more. We also told you we get better music and generally wider appeal to music as we simply get more music created to more niches. This was largely underresponded to and it stands in this debate, and it just only serves to extend the margins here. Right, let's talk about success. I think this was our most compelling material in this debate, and actually proving why the comparative for these people within this debate to record labels is so much worse than what we have under status quo. We told you that the determinant factor of success within the music industry is your ability to have capital, whether it be the ability to use your capital for advertising, to boost your social media platform, to advertise more, to boost your algorithm, to buy higher quality equipment and better studio placements, so you just generally produce better quality music and you get like more views and more engagement. As a consequence of like all of this like being directly attributed to wealth, in the absence of a system of labels, only those with wealth are going to be the ones who are successful in the music industry. And we told you, crucially, record labels provide the opportunity for niche like music types, like minority kind of music, to break into this market because they just simply do not have as much capital as the rich white people. Right. What do we hear in response to this? We heard that like music success comes through other mechanisms such as like social media, such as SoundCloud. I thought this was ridiculous on the grounds that your success on most of these platforms, such as social media, such as SoundCloud, can be directly attributed to your capital and your ability to promote yourself, your ability to like buy followers and buy views on these platforms. So I don't actually think that did enough to serve like an alternative mechanism. The other thing they said is that these people still have access to like equipment such as recording studios, say at a community college. We tell you at a comparative level, the people that have money just generally have better quality music, and you're simply just going to produce better quality music if you can like use like the latest like mixing equipment, the latest producer, as opposed to some 20-year-old mic that just like sounds really crackly and just generally doesn't produce good music. So I think we uniquely provide the opportunity for those who do not get success in the music opportunity. Next, talking about the artists, I think this like really extends the margin here because I think we get substantially better outcomes for the artists as well in this debate. Three reasons for this. Firstly, just generally better mental health, as these companies, these record labels have incentives to keep your mental health well so you continue producing good music. And there's like the benefits of the labels, like reducing stress, providing new things such as therapists. Secondly, we told you get access to a managing team on a label to remove the stress from other aspects, and you can like focus on producing music as opposed to like getting your new merch line out or going like on a tour and sorting that out. Thirdly, we told you that you get the unique benefit when you're signed to a label to get access to the connections, to the equipment, to the ability to like feature on other people's tracks from being with a label that you do not get as an independent artist, and that goes a long way in substantiating these individuals' careers. Finally, onto the power imbalance. I think this was the most compelling push in this debate, and I think we actually proved that the power imbalance lies in the hands of the artists in this debate. 4 reasons. Firstly, we told you that contracts generally exist. They have lawyers. They're not going to be outright abused. Secondly, we told you that artists and fans have immense leveraging power, and they can use the fact that they'll walk away from the company or the fans boycott their music platform to threaten these companies to improve their ways. Thirdly, we told you that simple norms changing in society, meaning that working like music producers into the ground is something that simply doesn't pass anymore. Fourthly, and finally, we told you that if they do like encounter a bad label, they can simply like re-sign at a different label because they've proved themselves to be a good artist, or they just create their new platform. I'm incredibly proud to stand on the side of team opportunity and team uplifting in this debate.
All right, we thank that speaker for their speech and would now like to invite up the leader of the affirming team to close out the debate.
The reality is that when you're first signed by a record label, you don't have the money to buy a lawyer. You don't have a large fan base because it's still building, and that means that they're not diehard yet. So that power imbalance in between the record label and the individual artist does not only exist, but it is so massive that it is the biggest harm in this debate, because it means that the record labels absolutely destroy the mental health of their artists and take away any kind of profits the artists can try and earn from their hard-earned work. 2 things I'll talk to you about today. Firstly, I'll be talking about that power imbalance, and then secondly, I'll talk about how we get better music production. Right, power imbalance. What we told you here is that because record labels have such vast amounts of money and vast amounts of power and vast amounts of lawyers behind them, they can manipulate and coerce these artists who have significantly less money, who have just come to a new city to try and make it big and something that they are passionate about. And mean that they entirely control them. They make them entirely change their image or sign unfair contracts because these artists don't have enough money to buy a lawyer to make sure that contract is fair. Right. What we heard in response from this was mainly material that only applies to large artists. But we told you from the start, this impacting applies to those smaller artists that are a lot wider, and there's a lot more of them within this community, right? Because they only talked about how Harry Styles can walk away from this large company and have their fans follow them. But we told you from my first speech that that isn't possible for these smaller artists to do. These smaller artists, we told you, make up the majority of it because this is such a lucrative industry that people want to get into. They don't have such a large fan base that they have the power to be able to walk away from it and make everyone boycott all the old songs they made that go and profit that industry, right? And we told you that they don't have enough power because they sign into like these coercive contracts that they can't understand because they don't have enough legal knowledge, because they can't afford a lawyer, whereas the record label can afford billions of lawyers to be able to fight against that one artist if they try to leave unfairly, if they try to walk away, or if they try and go and create defamation, right? So what that means, defamation, sorry. What that means is that these artists are just too afraid to walk away from these places. It means that these record labels incredibly easily exploit these artists and absolutely destroy their mental health. I talked about to you at first about what happened to Miley Cyrus and how she was pushed to the edge by her record label. This is material I want to bring back because it shows you how massive this impact is, right? And this is happening to every single small artist who exists signed to a record label, right? These are hundreds of people, thousands of people who go through this industry and have the worst time in their lives because their record labels are so primed to entirely exploit them, right? This also means that there's less money for these artists as well. So it directly interacts with anything they brought about how artists can get more money when they're with a record label, because I told you about how those contracts are unfair, but I also told you about how the record labels are able to play out how much it costs to them to be able to push this kind of content. What that means is that the power imbalance is the most important thing here. That's what we went on. But I'll talk about how we also get better music production, right? The main thing I want to talk about here is just what made came with this push, that it's just only with people with capital can make all of the music. We told you a few reasons why that's not true. There's actually lots of accessible options. Producing can be really cheap, especially now that record labels don't get to play up how expensive it is. And we can push people through social media, right? Because you don't even need virality to go out there. You just need to be able to be a part of that algorithm that will push you to people who are interested in you. But we tell you that even if it's only people with capital who are making music, we tell you at least they're not being exploited, right? At least the record label isn't milking everything dry from them, destroying their mental health and all of those outcomes that I just talked about, right? We told you that at the very worst for us, we still make incredibly good music because it's still music that people go and want to listen to, even if it's these people with capitals. What that means is we also get better music production, but more importantly, we save our artists from absolutely being destroyed by this awful industry.